And there's a freaking dog hair in my nail polish already. Hi, my name is Adriana, and today I will be doing the 7 books for 7 days book tag created by Darian Reads. So today my setup is a little different. Time is a precious commodity right now. So I am coming to you with 5-day hair, and I'm going to be doing my nails because this weekend we're going to a wedding and my nails are too long to be naked. So I will be doing this tag while doing my nails. So let's go ahead and jump into what this tag is. As I mentioned, this tag was created by Darian from Darian Reads, and the whole idea of it was going to be based on kind of like a 7-day vacation, road trip, fly trip, just kind of your generic 7-day trip, and each day of the week is associated with one of the book prompts. Darian was kind enough to tag me in her original video, and I am very excited to be partaking in this. It looks like a super fun tag. We'll go ahead and get started with the questions. Starting off with Monday. Monday is our travel day, and as we all know, traveling, be it plane, train, or automobile, is exhausting. So the first prompt is a book that feels like coffee. So I think the original intent of this question is a book that makes you feel energetic or excited, or depending on how coffee makes you feel, maybe that's tired. But I heard book, coffee, travel, and my mind couldn't get off the autobiography of Kathryn Janeway. If you're not a big ol' nerd like me, you probably don't know who Kathryn Janeway is. She is the captain of the USS Voyager in the TV series Star Trek Voyager, and this book is exactly what it sounds like. It is an autobiography of her life written by an author who's done a few different Trek show to book kind of adaptation sort of stuff. So it was really, really cool. I listened to it as an audiobook, and the audiobook is actually narrated by the actress Kate Mulgrew, who played Janeway in the show. So it was cool to be able to kind of jump into that world. Star Trek Voyager was such a big part of my childhood. I used to watch it with my parents growing up, and I really enjoyed it. It was a big part of the reason I went into STEM. So to be able to jump into that world and feel like I was getting to know this character who was such a role model to me growing up was super duper cool and fun. And I'm a huge Trekkie, and I love Star Trek Voyager, and I think that's most people's least favorite Trek, but I don't care because it's my favorite. And there's a freaking dog hair in my nail polish already. It's written like a typical autobiography where it goes through her entire life. If you're not familiar with the basis of the show, it's like all the other Star Treks except this crew gets flown into what they call the Delta Quadrant, which is a very far away part of our galaxy. So they are totally disconnected from the rest of Starfleet and the Federation and whatnot, and just having to deal with how to make the trek home all by themselves in this foreign place. So it was cool. Definitely a great show to check out if you haven't. And if you have watched the show and you enjoyed it, I would definitely recommend this book. So the next day is Tuesday. We've got to our destination, we're starting to unpack, and we forgot something, as you usually do. The prompt for this day is a forgettable book. I actually went through my reading log to figure out which book I forgot, and the one I forgot is In the Woods by Tana French. I read this for the Shelf This Book Club that Is Bailey Reading put together, and I barely remembered what happened like right after I finished reading it, because it's very slow-paced detective book. And thinking back onto it now, I mean, I read it a few months ago at this point, and I could not tell you like a single thing that happened except it's a detective detecting. What do they do? They investigate murders in his hometown. That's kind of it. It's just so I mean, if you're interested in like true crime investigations, this felt very much like shadowing a detective, and it's just that's not my vibe. Like, if I'm reading a detective thriller, I want it to be a thriller. I want bad police work. I want them barging into people's houses without a warrant. I think this book was basically as close to true crime as you could get without it actually being about a true grisly murder. But that's just not my vibe. The next day is Wednesday, which is our excursion day, going on a tour, going surfing, doing something. Not in our Airbnb/hotel. And the prompt for this one is a fast-paced book, and immediately what came to me was Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. This was another audiobook that I listened to. It was like the first fiction audiobook I had listened to in a really long time. So I was kind of nervous because I normally like to listen to nonfiction because it feels more kind of like a lecture to me. I kind of feel like I'm, back in college listening to lectures. So I was a little nervous about how I was going to be able to keep up with a fiction, sci-fi, whatever else novel as far as world building goes. But I started this book off at one time playback just to make sure I didn't get lost. And then after like the first 4 chapters, I started listening to it at like 2.5 speed, just because like I had to know what was happening next. Like this book it's so intense and it's so cool. I guess I could talk a little bit about what it's about and what it is. So it is, as I mentioned, a sci-fi novel, and it's a parallel universe trope. A man gets kidnapped one day and gets put into a reality that is not his own, and the rest of the book is him trying to figure out how to get back to his own reality. And it is so cool and so fun, and it was the first book I had read with this, I guess, what do they call it, like portal sci-fi, or I don't know, like whatever subgenre of sci-fi you want to call it, where there's worlds very similar to our own with like a couple small to large differences, and just watching him jump to these different Earths and figuring out, what was different, what he was looking for, how he was going to find his own way back to his own reality was so cool to me and so different than anything I had read in a long while. So our excursion is done. It is now Thursday, what has been deemed the most underrated day of the week, which I can get on board with. Thursday kind of gets swept under the rug because, you're just so close to Friday that you just kind of ignore, like, Thursdays can be a good day too. But as Thursday being the most underrated day of the week, the prompt for this one is to pick what you think is an underrated book. And I kind of went through all the books on my Goodreads systematically and tried to find one that didn't have a lot of ratings. So not necessarily something that was rated low, just because I think book ratings are so subjective and kind of weird. I don't know. I've talked about this in like the last 4 videos I've had now, I think, but I just don't really like the idea of rating books on the whole. So I just went and found a book that had not very many ratings that I thought should probably be a little more popular than it was. And what I came up with was Space Opera, and I don't remember who wrote it, but I will put up a picture of the book so you can see the author. But I picked this up in a bookstore a couple years ago, mostly because I liked the cover. And then I read it, and while it wasn't my super cup of tea, I felt like it should have been a lot more popular than it was. Like, I've never heard anybody else talk about it. It seems like something that should have been really, really popular. So it only had like 13,000 ratings on Goodreads, which I know sounds like a lot, but compared to a lot of the other stuff I read, which is usually a lot more popular, it's like nothing. The basis of this book is, I'm trying to remember the whole plot, but something about, I think some musicians get captured off of Earth and kind of get swept up into this whole big American Idol sort of situation, but it's on like a galactic scale. So it's kind of like that episode of Rick and Morty with like the big heads, like, show me what you got.
Show me what you got. I want to see what you got.
They just kind of get wrapped up in this whole musical contest thing. And I don't remember if they're representing Earth or if they're just along the ride with some other team of musicians, a band, if you will. I mean, I enjoyed it. It wasn't like, it was pretty much a solid, like, average for me as far as enjoyment, but it seemed like it had a lot of the trappings of what should have been a much more popular book. So if you check it out and enjoy it, you should let me know. If you really, really enjoy it, maybe tell me to reread it so I actually remembered what happened, because I read this book while I was still in my kind of not reading phase after I graduated college, so I was really only reading like 1 or 2 books a year, so I probably read it over the course of like a month and kept forgetting what was going on, and that's probably why I didn't enjoy it that much. So it is now Friday, and I only have 1 layer of nail polish on one hand, so I can see this is going very well. But Friday night is our night to go out and get a nice dinner. So the prompt for this one is to pick a book with food on the cover. And again, I'm not really going with like what this prompt is supposed to be, but I want to talk about the autobiography of Julia Child, My Life in France. I also thought about talking about the cookbooks, but while I own a copy of both Volume 1 and 2 of Mastering the Art of French Cooking, I never made anything out of them. So I'm just going to talk about the autobiography. But for those who don't know, Julia Child is a famous American chef who wrote the books Mastering the Art of French Cooking, and she lived an incredible life. She met her husband in the OSS, which was the precursor to the CIA back in World War II, and while she was in there, she helped out all sorts of like covert technological advancement. Like she made a real life shark bait, but this book, her autobiography, specifically focuses on her time after she had retired out of the service, but her partner, I can't remember his name right now, but he was played by Stanley Tucci in the movie. But her partner was still working for the government, and so they were living in Paris together for his job, and she decided to take up cooking. She wanted to and was bored and ended up being really good at it and decided to write a cookbook on French cooking for an American audience and kind of her struggles in getting that going. It's just full of such joy. I mean, if you haven't watched Julia Child, like any of her shows or anything before, she's one of the most joyful people to have ever existed, and you can't help but smile when you see her. She has a weird accent and a huge laugh, and so it's fun listening to her book. You can just feel all the joy coming through. So even if you're not that interested in cooking or Paris or anything else, I would recommend it just because it's a definite kind of shot of endorphins book. So it's Saturday, our trip is starting to come to a close, and we don't want it to end. So the prompt for this is to pick a book that ends on a cliffhanger, and the only one that really came to me was a book I read maybe a decade ago? I don't know, probably at least a decade ago. When did this book come out? Yeah, so like 11 years ago, because I read this book before the sequel came out, and the sequel came out in 2010. Many, many years ago, but The Maze Runner. So again, I read this book over a decade ago, and I don't super remember all the bits and pieces of the plot, but I do remember at the end of the book, I guess spoilers maybe, if you care. Do people care about the Maze Runner anymore? Probably not. But at the end of the book, they escape the maze with Thomas and the chick, and they get out into the little government official buildings, and I think that's when Thomas and the girl maybe either get their memories back or they realize that they had something to do with it. I remember being like, oh my gosh, at the time, like, what the heck? And so excited for the next one to come out. And I think I had to wait a few months before the next one came out. There we go. I don't really remember much about this book, but I remember being so freaked out by the cliffhanger. It is now Sunday, the last day of our trip. We are very sad. So this is to pick a book that made you cry. And for that, I'm going to go with a book that I read a while ago, but the TikTok darling, The Song of Achilles. I think there was a lot of other reasons this book made me cry. I read it. It was the first book I started and finished while I was living in Austria for work. And so I was kind of homesick, and if you haven't read it, it's kind of sad at the end, and I was just so many emotions living by myself in a foreign country where I didn't speak the language. So I think there's probably some other reasons as to why that book made me cry so much, but it definitely did. And I think it also actually made me cry more than once. Another good one is The Lovely War by Julie Berry. I was also traveling during that, but domestic travel. I think I was just going to Arkansas. But I was on a plane when I was reading that book. and I started crying. And the guy sitting next to me looked very concerned but never said anything. So here's to you, random guy on the plane. So that is the end of this tag, and I still have to finish doing the first layer on one hand as well as doing probably 2 more layers of nail polish. So much for trying to run things in parallel, but I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to do this tag, then you should definitely do it. It's a really fun, cool tag. Thank you so much to Darian for creating it, and thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you on the next video.